is up, everyone? Darkside Phil here, and welcome to another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series, where I give you maximum truth and minimum bullshit regarding the most recent retail video game releases. And as you know, when I review games, I don't have any kind of bias. I'm an independent reviewer, and therefore what I tell you is my honest experience with the newest games. Today we're going to talk about a game that is kind of polarizing, especially for Western audiences, because it is more of a traditional style game, really doesn't necessarily break the mold, so to speak, when it comes to this certain style of game, but at the same time combines several unique elements, an interesting story, great graphic design, and pretty solid, dependable gameplay to come together and be a pretty decent package. The game that we're talking about today is Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch, or what I'm actually going to be holding up probably for the review is this, which is the steelbook case that I got for pre-ordering the game at GameStop, simply because it's easier to talk about the game when you have actual characters on the cover that you can point to. So, at its core, Ni no Kuni is exactly what it sets out to be. A solid, lengthy Japanese role-playing game. And what I mean by that, when I say JRPG, is that yes, it's going to have a lot of the same conventions and things that Japanese RPGs have had over the years. You're going to have turn-based combat, you're going to have item management, you're going to be able to level up your characters with different items and abilities, there's going to be magic spells, there's going to be grinding style combat, and there's going to be large boss battles. So everything that you would expect from a JRPG is present in Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch. Now the reason that this game is unique is because it actually is a game using the art style and kind of almost writing style of Studio Ghibli, or Studio Ghibli. I apologize, no one seems to have a consensus on how the hell you pronounce it. But if you've seen any of the movies that have come out of this studio before, we're talking epic masterpiece works of anime that really have become just huge fan favorites and cult hits. And so to take that kind of an atmosphere and that graphic design and to put it into a JRPG, in my opinion, is a perfect fit. And I really am going to probably draw parallels between this game and Blue Dragon a little bit, because Blue Dragon was another JRPG several years ago that was a very traditional JRPG, but it actually took the art style of the artist who actually created such things as Dragon Ball and Dragon Quest and put that into a JRPG, and that's pretty much what Studio Ghibli has done with this game. Okay? So, Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch, what is it about? Primarily, at its very core, it's the story of a young boy named Oliver, who is basically a happy-go-lucky kid. He's trying to have fun. Unfortunately, a tragedy besets him. And after this tragedy happens, his longtime stuffed animal companion comes to life out of nowhere and explains to him that there's still a chance to undo the tragedy that's happened if he goes to this magical world and basically goes through this epic quest. And at first he's very apprehensive, then he finally trusts him, and his name is actually Mr. Drippy, who's the Lord High Lord of the Fairies. Yeah, I know, it's kind of crazy and far-fetched and kind of silly, but he actually becomes your comic relief for most of the game. He's your stalwart companion. He's always with you throughout the course of Ni no Kuni. And as you go into this parallel world, as you can see here, it's a very green, very open fantasy world, kind of medieval in nature, although there are other settings that are a little bit different, but there's castles and such. So again, traditional JRPG fare. But the first thing you notice when you go into this world is the amazing beauty of the art design of Studio Ghibli and the great job that they did, not only designing the actual overworld. I mean, the first time you walk on the overworld, your jaw drops. It's beautiful, okay? But also the cutscenes. A lot of the cutscenes of the game are on the fly rendered, but other cutscenes are actually 2D Studio Ghibli anime, which is awesome to see that in a video game because so many people like the anime. And so, let's talk a little bit about the gameplay. As you explore the world, you're going to be doing different quests for different reasons. At first, your first quest is to actually find a wand so that you can cast magic. After that, your quest is to try to get spells and try to level yourself up as a wizard so that you can actually do more stuff. Overlooming this entire world is an evil presence, the Dark Jin Shadar, who has basically took it upon himself to keep everyone on this world in check. And what he does is actually steals pieces of people's hearts. It makes them what they call broken-hearted. And what ends up happening is these people go into like a funk where because they're missing a piece of their heart, they're not their normal selves. And this is an actual game mechanic that's a core part of the game, where your goal is to try to figure out what part of their heart is missing and then go find someone that has an overwhelming amount of it. So, perfect example, you may find someone who for some reason they used to be a really good mechanic, but all of a sudden they just given up and they have no motivation whatsoever and they just don't want to do it anymore. And what you find out is they have a lack of enthusiasm. So then you might go find someone who maybe is a town guard and he loves his job and he's working overtime and he, you know, always wants to be standing guard. So obviously he's overly enthusiastic, and what you do is you take the enthusiasm from that guy and you give it to the guy who needs it. And this is not only a core element of the story of the game, but also of the side quests of the game. A lot of the times you could just find people in towns who have had parts of their heart missing, and by giving it to them you solve a side quest. Outside of that, there's also a game mechanic where there's the two worlds aspect. Yes, there's the regular Motorville, which is basically the hometown of Oliver in his real world, but then there's this mystical world that he travels to. And each world has a parallel, meaning if there's a person in this world, there's going to be a corresponding person in this world who's basically the same person. Now, they may not necessarily be equal. For example, in one world, they may be like a anthropomorphic, you know, animal who acts and talks like a human. In the other world, they may just be a normal cat. Okay, so there's things like that that happen, and what you need to do is find correlating people, and a lot of the times you'll be traveling between the two worlds to try to solve puzzles and problems depending on one version of the person who may be brokenhearted, and it might help the person in the other world. So that's the core kind of, you know, story-based element of the game. Now, when you're talking about combat, it's a lot different. Combat is turn-based combat. The difference being that you can actually move freely around the field before your action. So you can actually run around a full 3D plane, and actually strategically positioning yourselves during combat can actually be a core part of battles and boss fights. Now, you start out just as yourself, but during the course of the game you actually start finding what are called familiars, which are basically, I would call them oversized Pokemon, okay? It's basically these mystical creatures that you find throughout the world of Ni no Kuni that fight for you, and you summon them at the beginning of battles, and you command them, whether they are attacking, they defend, they have different abilities that you actually unlock as they level up. Again, very similar, drawing parallels to Pokemon here. And there are different types of these familiars. There are ones that are melee combat, there are ones that are heavily magic based, there are ones that are kind of a combination, there are ones that maybe are more fire element, ones that focus more on water element, and over the course of the game, you're actually able to upgrade these familiars with different items. There's actually treat items, which are basically pieces of food that as you feed your familiars, they actually level up in different stat abilities. And there's also I believe they call them drop abilities. There's like sun drop, moon drops, and when you feed these to your familiars, they actually evolve, again, very similar to Pokemon, where you can choose, gee, do I want them to be more fire-based or more water-based? And when you do that, they have the ability to level up even further and unlock new spells and more powerful abilities. The gameplay is very similar to a lot of JRPGs when it comes to combat. I'm going to be honest, you've probably played a bunch of JRPGs that play like this before, but where this game really has a unique aspect is that during the combat, there's going to be critical times when your enemies are going to be casting something or maybe doing charging up for a very special attack, and you have the ability to do one of two things. You can either try to attack them during their charging time to interrupt the attack, in which case they never use it, or you can either defend and or evade, which is the same command depending on what kind of familiar you're using, and your familiar will basically try to avoid or block the attack and get reduced damage, okay? Now, by doing certain things such as hitting at a critical time, counterattacking and canceling out an attack, and or blocking or evading at the right time, you're actually going to unleash things on the screen that I believe they call the like lumine or lumines. I'm not sure exactly what they're called, but they're little colorful specks. And what these do are they either heal your HP or your MP, okay? So depending on how well you do in a fight, you may actually be able to heal up after the fight completely for free and not have to worry about using healing items or using magic to heal yourself after the fight, which is a pretty interesting mechanic. I haven't seen a lot of games where if you actually fight well, you actually get the ability to heal yourself after the fight or recover. So really, what I've just explain to you is the core elements of Ni no Kuni. Now, of course, there's going to be exploration. There's going to be looting. You're going to find hidden chests and things throughout the world. And over the course of the game, you'll level up your wand to be able to open up different chests. You'll be using your magic to solve puzzles like, oh, I need a bridge here, or, uh-oh, I'm in a trial and I have to move statues around in a certain way in order to solve this puzzle and progress on with the game. And yes, that is present in the game, but primarily the main the main gameplay is going to be traversing the world, fighting enemies, leveling up, until you finally find a dungeon. You go to the dungeon, you get to the end, you fight the boss, it tells you what to do to go to the next part of the game. Over the course of the game, there's a world map, and you find different ways to travel across this world map. At first, it's just on foot. Later on, you can actually use magic to teleport to any town that or location that you've already been to. Then you actually get a ship that you can use to sail the open world. And then finally, near the end of the game, you actually get a dragon that you can ride. Again, traditional JRPG fare. This has kind of been there, done that. But the difference here is that this is a amazing graphic design. I really feel that where Ni no Kuni shines as a game are the artistic direction of the game, the graphical design of the game, everything about the looks of the game is beautiful. It looks like you're interacting in a Studio Ghibli anime. The story itself, a little bit cliche, but I have to say at the same time, it does have some unique elements in it, being that you have this two-world aspect, the broken-hearted aspect, a few twists and plot things in there that maybe you don't expect during the course of the game. And the game is pretty lengthy when it comes to even the story. Even when you're in, like, you seem like maybe I'm in the final hour here of the game, and the next thing you know, the game keeps going. And you're like, wow, I didn't expect that. I thought that the game was going to be over as soon as I beat this particular boss or did this particular thing, and it just keeps going and going and going. So in that respect, if you're really looking for a game where you're going to get bang out of your buck, Ni no Kuni is definitely that game, okay? Some of the things that I really like about the game. I like the aspect of the game that it's you can have different familiars, okay? You know, one of the biggest catches and one of the biggest addictive things about the Pokemon franchise is that you can play it differently depending on what Pokemon you're using at any time. And the same thing here. In Ni no Kuni, you can actually hold up to 3 familiars at any time on each person, and on the fly during battle, you can actually go between them. So you may be fighting a new enemy and you find out, well, my main familiar is actually a melee style, and you hit him with the sword, uh-oh, it didn't do much damage. Well, I should probably then switch out and go to a magic style and try that. And then you might find, oh, this enemy's weakness is water magic, and so you use the familiar that has water magic to kill him. So that's really neat. And it's really cool once you finally have your full party of 3 people who each have 3 familiars that they're going to be going between on the fly during each battle. The battles can actually be pretty exciting and action-packed. I definitely like the boss battles of the game, but let's face it, in a JRPG, the big boss fights are always a major feature. The boss fights in this game can be pretty unique, and what I mean is some bosses really focus primarily on just physical attacks, and therefore it's just standard fare, just attack the shit out of it until it dies. Other boss fights are a little bit different, where maybe you can't really hurt them with physical attacks, maybe even some magic attacks. Maybe you need to hit them at the critical point where they're doing an attack and it stuns them, and in that case what actually will happen is above their heads it'll say chance, which means they're stunned temporarily, and now's your time to actually use a mechanic where by pressing one button your entire party will go all out and just pummel him with the most damaging attacks that they have. Similarly to that, when those boss fights or boss monsters are charging up their most powerful attacks, and if you're not sure if you're going to be able to interrupt it, there's a button that you can press that makes everyone defend at once, so everyone can just defend against that attack and they don't get too hurt. So that's really where I think the game shines. It has a little bit of variety in the gameplay versus some other JRPGs where it may be, well, that character's just a melee fighter, so he's limited to just melee combat. If you're fighting a boss that melee isn't good against, that character's worthless. In this game, it's not like that, because you can always change between the 3 familiars on the fly, okay? I also like the fact that, just like Pokemon, you can catch new familiars during the course of the game. In fact, any standard enemy that you fight can actually be recruited. What actually happens during a certain point in the game is one of your party members gets the ability to play a harp, which if you hit a enemy with a critical hit, there's a chance at the end of the fight that they may be like stunned, and then you can actually recruit them by playing the harp, and they become part of your party. So during the course of the game, there's literally hundreds of these familiars that you can recruit and actually fight with, which is cool because it adds to the variety of the game. And again, as I've already mentioned, leveling them up, giving them different evolutions, and allowing them to get new spells and abilities over the course of the game is pretty neat. I also like the fact that you don't always have to fight with the familiars. You can actually switch back to your human characters. Unfortunately, the human characters are a lot weaker than the familiars, except for when it comes to actually casting spells and using items. The humans are actually the only characters in the game that can use items. So that's pretty neat. That we're running out of MP. Got to switch back to my human character, use the item. Okay, now switch back to a different familiar. And there's also the mechanic that the familiars have a stamina bar, which means you can't use them for the whole fight. After using them for a certain amount of time, they'll get tired, and you're forced to either switch back to your human or switch to a different familiar on your team. So there's all these unique elements that are always going on during combat that keep it fresh, and I really did like that about the game. And the length of the game. The length, undoubtedly, is going to be one of the best things about the game. Now, let me say something. When I played Ni no Kuni, I did it in a style that befits an internet playthrough on YouTube, meaning I did not, by any means, go through and grind on camera and do a lot of repetitive combat on camera. In fact, what I did every night when I played this game is I actually grinded for a few hours every night. And if you don't know what grind means, it means that I went to a place where there's a lot of enemies and I just kept fighting them, and leveled my characters up at night. So that when I went to play the next day, I could just pretty much go through every dungeon without worrying about, these enemies are so tough, I have to go back and level up several times for several hours in order to even kill these guys or to beat these bosses. And I do want to note that that is one style to play these games. You could grind repeatedly, and that's a way to get through the game. But this game also does have the ability to really adjust on the fly. You really have to be very careful and micromanage your familiars and be sure they're defending against the most powerful attacks and or they're attacking during those charging of those attacks so they can interrupt them. And so you can play the game in different styles, and that's cool, and that lends itself to some variety in how you want to play the game. Some things that I didn't like about the game, okay? First off, that whole element, like I mentioned, that, your enemy is charging up this special attack, and you either have to defend it or interrupt it. It's neat, but at the same time, it doesn't always implement itself well. And what I mean by that is that some of these attacks, you don't know whether or not they're a powerful attack. So if you're fighting a boss for the first time, and he's charging up, I don't know, let's say, Dark Wave. Okay, he's charging it up. Is that his most powerful attack? Is that the one that you really need to defend against? Because what happens is a lot of the times you'll defend against one attack and it's not so powerful. And then all of a sudden, then the boss decides to use his super powerful attack, and because you just defended, you're not able to defend again so quickly, and you get hit by the more powerful attack, and you're like, fuck, I didn't know that. And so there is a little bit of trial and error when it comes to the boss fights, learning what their more powerful attacks are, and what are the right times to attack and to defend. But I'll be honest, there were some bosses where they throw out these attacks entirely too fast. You may be in the middle of an attack that you were doing, like a magical spell. So you're casting the spell, all of a sudden the boss goes into the charge mode. Okay, I'm going to evade. Nope, too late. Boss already casts it. And you're like, now that's not fair. That's more action-based combat. And this is a turn-based JRPG. It's kind of annoying that they kind of implemented this action-based kind of timed deal that you have to do immediately, and sometimes you just can't get to it quickly enough, and it could lead to some cheap deaths and defeats during the course of the game, and that could be really annoying. There also is the fact that from people who didn't grind like me, I've heard that the game actually has some pretty big difficulty spikes, meaning you will go through an entire dungeon fighting the enemies pretty much no problem, then all of a sudden you get to the boss and he kicks your fucking ass. And that, unfortunately, is something that seems to happen in traditional JRPGs. There could be difficulty spikes. If you play it the style that I did and you're grinding every day, several hours, you're probably not going to be faced with those problems. But a lot of people don't enjoy the grinding style. A lot of people like to be challenged every boss fight by the combat, and so you may be a little disappointed with the game if that's the case, because if you go to tackle it like that, you may find yourself dying repeatedly to certain bosses just because there are these jumps in difficulty. What I definitely recommend is this. If you like Studio Ghibli and you like anime, and you want a really cool story and an adventure game, play the game on easy. Because even though it's on easy, it is still challenging. I actually played it on easy, and I did still find certain parts, especially the end of the game, challenging. What a lot of people are saying is the end of the game, especially the final boss fights, can be very challenging unless you're playing on easy or unless you've grinded enough that you're pretty much over-leveled and you can steamroll through the fights. So, my recommendation, if you're not a hardcore JRPG fan, you're going to want to play this on easy. But if you are a hardcore JRPG fan, there's a lot here that's rewarding. Not only after the extremely long gameplay, I mean, my playthrough was 138 parts, I mean, those are 10 minutes each, and then divide that by 6. I mean, we're talking 20 to 30 hours of standard gameplay, and that's just without including the grinding. If you include the grinding in there, then you're talking another probably 20, 30 hours, and I didn't even do all the side quests. There were very many side quests in the game that I didn't do. And side quests, as I've said, some of them relate to that broken-hearted kind of puzzle aspect. Some other side quests have to do with hidden villages and things that are throughout the game. Some other side quests involve going out and killing certain specific enemies that show up on the world map. So there's different things, bounties, all kinds of different side content. And then after you actually beat the game actually opens up even more side content. There's more side quests, there's actually a secret boss that you can fight at the end of the game, and there's you can actually play the game through again where it's more difficult, okay? There's actually new golden familiars that open up that you can collect. So there's a hell of a lot to do even after you beat the game. So if you're a JRPG fan, this is right up your alley. But now I'm going to speak as more of a common gamer. If you're a common gamer and you don't like the repetitive JRPG formula and you don't like grinding, this game probably is not for you, okay? Even playing it on easy, you're probably going to find yourself kind of challenged and or bored because, let's face it, JRPGs focus, the gameplay is really focused around the repetitive combat. And a lot of people just don't like that. Well, then this just isn't going to be your cup of tea. By no means does that mean that this game isn't good. In fact, this game is pretty great. Out of all the JRPGs that I've played over the past several years, I actually liked Ni no Kuni better than Final Fantasy XIII 1 and 2. I liked it better than Xenoblade Chronicles that I played last year, and I got so bored during it, I just quit. And the reason is, Xenoblade Chronicles was a game where they went overboard. Like, they had dungeons in that game that were 3 to 4 hours long of repetitive nonsense. Ni no Kuni, at least in that regard, picks up the pace, keeps everything moving pretty quickly. I was never in a dungeon where I felt, man, this dungeon is dragging out way too damn long. And I was always interested because each dungeon looks different. That was another cool thing. Every dungeon looked completely different. Maybe there's a volcano, then there's an ice level, then there's a graveyard level, then there's a castle, then there's a temple. It was never like, wow, everything looks like the same generic interior, this is boring as hell. So in that regard, Ni no Kuni does a really great job. So, I definitely recommend Ni no Kuni to fans of JRPGs. If you like JRPGs, this is a game that you're really going to enjoy and you're going to cherish and you're going to want to play for hours on end. You can play it in 2 different styles, the more casual style on easy mode or the more hardcore style on normal mode. And by grinding, you can essentially change the way the game is played. You can either really challenge yourself by not grinding at all, or you can grind a few hours a day as you play it and you make the game a lot easier, and I like the fact that you have those 2 options. If I was not able to do the grinding, and I really had to be forced with these boss fights that all of a sudden had a giant difficulty spike, I may have been pissed off, but I'm glad that there's a way around it, okay? All that being said, I don't think that anyone who's not a fan of this style of game is going to enjoy the game. I think there may be some people who are like, oh, I like Studio Ghibli, so I'm going to try Ni no Kuni. Well, if you've never played JRPGs before, I don't think that this is going to be a game that you're going to like. This really, at its core, is a JRPG in the utmost, and you have to expect that when you jump into the game. So for what it is, for all the factors that I'm weighing and considering in my head, I'm actually going to give Ni no Kuni an 8.5. That's right. I actually think the game is really good for what it is. Now, that's the thing. I've actually already seen a couple reviews for this game where people are like, I don't understand. It's just a JRPG with Studio Ghibli. Why do they think that that's good? Well, because for being a JRPG, it actually does things really well. Again, the art style, the amount of content, the combat, a lot of the things are exceptional. So if you actually like that style of game, it's going to be for you, and I have to give it a fair rating. When I weigh it with all the other JRPGs I've played over the past several years, this one was actually the best one out of the ones that I've played. So I have to give it a pretty good score, but on the flip side of that, it does have some annoyances that I've already mentioned, and that's why I can't give it like an amazing, outstanding top 10, score where it's really probably going to be one of everyone's best picks of the year. You have to know what you're getting into when you jump into a game like Ni no Kuni. As long as you understand what you are playing, you're probably going to enjoy the experience, and I definitely recommend it for anyone who likes that kind of JRPG experience. Okay, so that's it for the Hateful Truth video game review on Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch. I hope that you found it informative. I hope now that you have a better idea of whether or not this is a game that you would like to try out. And I hope that now you have an understanding of the game, and if you want to see some footage, you can always jump over to my gaming channel, DSP Gaming, and check out my playthrough of the game, because I did a full playthrough of it. It's probably going to help you out, especially if you're wondering what to do at certain parts of the game, so definitely check that out. But that's it. I'm going to wrap it up here for another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time for maximum truth and minimum bullshit. Peace out.